Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We've been learning about the cell cycle, and we are going to be learning today about how that relates to cancer. So cancer is it's a big group of diseases where the cell cycle is out of control. And so cells are dividing rapidly. If it's maybe in a tissue like the liver, then it could shut down the liver. Sometimes it can be happening in the blood, so there are blood cancers. And blood, of course, travels throughout the body, so that will affect many parts of our body. And so it's a serious topic. It's a serious disease, group of diseases. But it is important to learn about, because the more we understand how cancer works, the better we will be at finding treatments, and that's what we want. So we will be looking at really what's happening in the human body when someone has cancer, and what are ways that we can help people with cancer. And so we're going to start with a quick video, an overview of cancer.
We all start life as one single cell. Then that cell divides and we're 2 cells, then 4, then 8. Cells form tissues, tissues form organs, organs form us. These cell divisions, by which we go from a single cell to 100 trillion cells, are called growth. And growth seems like a simple thing because when we think of it, we typically think of someone getting taller, or later in life, wider. But to cells, growth isn't simple. Cell division is an intricate chemical dance that's part individual, part community-driven. And in a neighborhood of 100 trillion cells, sometimes things go wrong. Maybe an individual cell's set of instructions, or DNA, gets a typo, what we call a mutation. Most of the time, the cell senses mistakes and shuts itself down, or the system detects a troublemaker and eliminates it. But enough mutations can bypass these fail-safes, driving the cell to divide recklessly. That one rogue cell becomes 2, then 4, then 8. At every stage, the incorrect instructions are passed along to the cell's offspring. Weeks, months, or years after that one rogue cell transformed, you might see your doctor about a lump in your breast. Difficulty going to the bathroom could reveal a problem in your intestine, prostate, or bladder. Or a routine blood test might count too many white cells or elevated liver enzymes. Your doctor delivers the bad news. It's cancer. From here, your strategy will depend on where the cancer is and how far it's progressed. If the tumor is slow-growing and in one place, surgery might be all you need, if anything. If the tumor is fast-growing or invading nearby tissue, your doctor might recommend radiation or surgery followed by radiation. If the cancer has spread, or if it's inherently everywhere like a leukemia, your doctor will most likely recommend chemotherapy, or a combination of radiation and chemo. Radiation and most forms of chemo work by physically shredding the cell's DNA, or disrupting the copying machinery. But neither radiation nor chemotherapeutic drugs target only cancer cells. Radiation hits whatever you point it at, and your bloodstream carries chemotherapeutics all over your body. So what happens when different cells get hit? Let's look at a healthy liver cell, a healthy hair cell, and a cancerous cell. The healthy liver cell divides only when it's stressed. The healthy hair cell divides frequently, and the cancer cell divides even more frequently and recklessly. When you take a chemotherapeutic drug, it will hit all of these cells. And remember that the drugs work typically by disrupting cell division, so every time a cell divides, it opens itself up to attack. And that means that the more frequently a cell divides, the more likely the drug is to kill it. So remember that hair cell? It divides frequently and isn't a threat. And there are other frequently dividing cells in your body like skin cells, gut cells, and blood cells. So the list of unpleasant side effects of cancer treatment parallels these tissue types: hair loss, skin rashes, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, weight loss, and pain. That makes sense because these are the cells that get hit the hardest. So in the end, it's all about growth. Cancer hijacks cells' natural division machinery and forces them to put the pedal to the metal, growing rapidly and recklessly. But using chemotherapeutic drugs, we take advantage of that aggressiveness. and we turn cancer's main strength into a weakness.
Okay, so one of the ways we deal with cancer is by giving people chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a group of drugs that would attack rapidly dividing cells, so cells that divide and divide and divide very quickly. Cancer cells divide very quickly, and so it works well at killing off cancer cells. The problem is that we have other cells that also divide rapidly, your hair, for example, and so someone who has cancer and is being given chemotherapy, that's why they typically lose their hair, because the chemotherapy attacks those rapidly dividing cells as well. And we have other tissues in our body that the cells are rapidly dividing, and so chemotherapy affects those ones as well. And so chemotherapy can kill cancer cells, but it also can have a lot of side effects. So chemotherapy is helpful, but it's also not easy for people who have cancer. So it's important for us to understand the cell cycle when we are talking about cancer. And so here you can start filling in your notes. The production of new cells by cell division is highly regulated. It's very controlled. God has designed it really, really well. Okay, we are growing throughout our lives, and cells are constantly dividing, and we want that to be done very carefully. And so God has designed our cells to divide very, very carefully. If it were not, then cells could divide out of control and produce tumors. And tumors are lumps of cells dividing out of control. And then if that's in your liver or your intestines or in bones, then it's going to affect those tissues, and they will not work well, and you get very sick. Okay? And so this is a little diagram, hopefully reminding you of what cell cycle looks like, right? G1, and you get S where this DNA replicates, it continues to grow. We get prophase where they form X's, nuclear membrane breaks down, spindle fibers attach. Metaphase, they meet in the middle. Anaphase, they get pulled apart, right? It's very, very controlled, regulated, and organized. Okay, and that's in a healthy cell. And if you look at cells under a microscope, we can see this. So these are cells that, this is basically the nucleus of a cell at various stages of mitosis. And so what's the order here? Which one is prophase or metaphase or anaphase or telophase? You can probably guess. Okay, this one's probably the easiest, metaphase or anaphase, where they're being pulled apart. Prophase, the DNA is all in one nucleus, and telophase, we're separating them into two separate nuclei. Okay, very, very organized. God is a very good designer. Okay, the problem is that with the fall into sin, creation is under a curse, and so things are broken, and we can see that. And so that goes on the large scale. You have things like hurricanes and earthquakes that are destructive, but also on the very small scale. Mutations can happen. So mutations are mistakes in our DNA, and they usually happen when our cells divide and make new cells. That's when mutations often happen. And you might think, well, how often does that happen? Well, every day we make about 100 billion new cells. That's a staggering number. That is huge. And you're not going to get mistakes in all of those, of course, because again, cells are designed really well, but maybe over time you can get some mistakes. 100 billion, that's about how many stars we have in the Milky Way galaxy. So that's a phenomenal number of cells. Okay, we can't even comprehend that number, really. So when mutations happen in our DNA, then it could happen that a cell starts to divide out of control. Okay? Not all the time. You might get a mutation that is in the gene for eye color, right? That doesn't mean you're going to get cancer, okay? But getting certain mutations can potentially lead to cancer, and so we have to be careful with that. We have to be careful with, don't try to stay away from things that are potentially carcinogenic, right? Things that can lead to cancer. Cigarettes can lead to cancer sometimes, right? There's a danger there. You go to the beach and you're like, I'm going to get fried. Yes, well, that can lead to mutations as well. So we want to avoid things that have a risk. Now, certain genes are more likely to lead to cancer if they get a mutation. Remember, genes are sections of DNA that are a code and instructions for protein. Okay? Like the protein that affects your eye color or skin color. Okay? Or insulin, that's a protein and there's a gene that codes for that. There are other proteins, and we talked about these earlier, checkpoint proteins, and these are special proteins that will kind of regulate, control the cell cycle, and they'll stop the cell cycle for different reasons. So if the cell does not have enough nutrients, then it's not good for the cell to keep dividing. Or if the DNA is damaged, okay, there are checkpoint proteins that guard that, and they check if the DNA is damaged. And if it is damaged, then we don't want the cell to divide. Or if the chromosomes haven't separated properly during mitosis, then again, it will stop the cell cycle. Okay? So these proteins, we don't want mutations in our checkpoint proteins. We want those to work really well. Okay? So these checkpoint proteins help to prevent cancer, but if they get mutated, then cancer becomes more likely. Okay? And we can't control which genes are getting mutations, so we want to avoid things that can cause mutations. If there is a problem, okay, in that the checkpoint proteins notice, then there's basically two options. The cell will either fix the problem, or it'll start something called apoptosis, programmed cell death. The checkpoint proteins will actually destroy the cell that they are in. Okay? And that's a good thing. It's better to lose one cell than for that cell to become cancerous. Okay, so this is called programmed cell death, which is very important because it may stop a cancerous cell from dividing. Okay? And we will look at a video that shows what this looks like. Okay, what programmed cell death looks like in a cell. So this is a tissue, and it is maybe skin cells or maybe an intestine, and you've got all these pink healthy cells, but also this one diseased cell, potentially a cancerous cell. And the cancerous cell, the checkpoint proteins might trigger apoptosis to happen, where it destroys itself. But that can also be triggered by white blood cells. And white blood cells can actually kind of liquefy themselves, move out of the bloodstream into the tissue, and then go over top of the diseased cell. So this is the surface of the cancerous cell. That's the cell membrane. And over top of it now is the white blood cell, the killer T cell. And that is a protein that's sticking out of the cell membrane of the white blood cell. And it attaches to receptors on the diseased cell and sends a signal through the cancerous cell membrane And that is starting basically a chain reaction inside this cell, so that this cell actually will destroy itself. Okay, so it's producing these enzymes, these proteins called caspase 8. And caspase 8 goes around and starts to switch on other proteins called caspase 3. Okay, so caspase 3 is a type of protein. It's an enzyme. Enzymes are like the machinery inside of cells. And caspase 3 basically goes to town inside the cell, inside this cancer cell, and starts to just wreck everything. It's munching up the cell parts and destroying them. Remember, the goal here of the white blood cell is to send the signal into the cancer cell and cause it to wreck itself, destroy itself. And to get this pathway where a whole bunch of these enzymes are turned on that will destroy the cell. Now this thing is another thing that starts to get switched on. So this is all chemistry, remember. There's no brain here that is controlling this. We have these cell parts that can get activated, and so that they function. And so this is a larger, more complex molecule, and it's called an apoptosome. And what it's going to do is it's basically going to start switching on a whole bunch of caspase 3s. It's like a big old popcorn maker, and it's turning a whole bunch of them on. And remember, caspase 3 just starts wrecking everything. Okay? The cytoskeleton. Cells have a cell membrane, but then they also have a cytoskeleton that gives them their proper shape. But caspase 3 will just wreck the cytoskeleton. This thing can no longer hold itself together then. It can't maintain its shape. It's going to essentially liquefy as well. And it will just disperse as little globules. And we end up just peeing these out. So that is apoptosis, or programmed cell death. And it sounds bad, it's making cells die, but it's important because it stops a cancer cell from dividing and forming a tumor. And there are two ways that can be triggered. One, the cancer cell itself, the checkpoint proteins inside can trigger programmed cell death. Or white blood cells, as we saw in the video, can come along over top of the cancer cell and trigger apoptosis to happen as well. So it's very important because it stops a cancer cell from dividing and and forming a tumor. We really want our immune system to be strong and robust so that it can attack cancer cells. And so there are medications out there that just try to slow down the growth of a tumor, giving our immune system time to attack the tumor, okay? Giving our immune system time to just destroy those cells. Now, another big word or idea that we need to know is contact inhibition. So normal cells exhibit contact inhibition, okay, which means they'll grow in a controlled setting, okay? But when they come into contact with each other, they bump into each other, then that triggers them to stop dividing. So they come into contact, and that inhibits further growth. And that's a good thing. Okay, so if I was playing hockey and my brother came along and slashed me. He would never do that, and I get a big cut right in my arm. Okay, then the cells need to do cell division to repair that wound, right? So they divide and divide and divide. But once they come into contact with each other, then they stop dividing, so we don't end up with a big lump. Okay, so healthy cells do contact inhibition. Cancer cells do not have contact inhibition. So even though they're bumping into each other, coming into contact with each other, they'll just keep dividing out of control, and so you form a growth, a tumor, a lump, and that's because they will not inhibit that growth even when they come into contact with each other. So you can see here, this is just normal, healthy tissue growing in a controlled layer, but cancer cells will divide out of control. Even though they are pressed against each other, they will continue to just do cell division and produce a growth. Okay? And that can shut down a tissue like this, or an organ, okay? If that's maybe the liver or something like that. Next, angiogenesis. Our next big word, big idea regarding cancer. So cells need a blood supply. They need oxygen, they need nutrients, they also need blood vessels to take away wastes. And when cancer cells divide continuously, they eventually form a tumor. But those cells, that mass of cells, needs to have a blood supply. So if that tumor grows too far from a blood vessel, it'll actually send signals for new blood vessels to come grow toward it, so that it will feed the tumor. Okay, cancer cells are very fast dividing cells. They're very hungry cells. They actually need a lot of sugar. So one of the reasons we try to minimize sugar is cancer cells devour sugar about 10 to 20 times more than your regular cells. And so the tumor will send out signals for new blood vessels to grow toward it. And we call that angiogenesis. Okay, so this is an animation of blood traveling through the bloodstream. And those are red blood cells, and they carry oxygen to the cells. And here's a tumor, and it's growing, and it gets to a pretty large size, and it has blood vessels going toward it. And we've got white blood cells approaching it, triggering apoptosis in those cancer cells, trying to minimize the growth. So it's a real battle between the cancer cells are dividing and the white blood cells are attacking. But the cancer cells can send out these signals to nearby blood vessels saying, send us more blood vessels. So that's angiogenesis, right? The tumor gets to a big size and it needs new blood vessels to feed it. So doctors are prescribing certain drugs that you can put into the bloodstream, and they attach to these signal molecules that the cancer cells are sending out, and that blocks them from attaching to nearby blood vessels, blocking that signal so blood vessels will not grow toward the tumor. Okay? It blocks angiogenesis. And so that's going to slow down the growth of the tumor and give the white blood vessels, or white blood cells, the killer T cells, time to attack the tumor, the cancer cells. Okay, so angiogenesis, big word. Angio refers to our blood vessels, and genesis means to start or create. And so it's sending out signals for new blood vessels to come toward the tumor. The last key idea, another big word, is metastasis. Okay, so we can have a tumor in our body, in a certain part of the body, And cancer cells can break off of those tumors. Not all tumors will allow that. But they can break off and spread to other parts of the body, damaging other organs. So this is called metastasis. So we really try with cancer to do early detection. We want to notice the cancer early so that it does not metastasize. It doesn't spread. Okay, we want to capture it before that happens. Because otherwise you're going to get multiple tumors in your body, in different parts of the body. And I know all of this sounds a little bit overwhelming. Psalm 23, I think, is very helpful for me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. It's true for you as well. He guides me on paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And so even though a lot of this seems, like out of control, it is all in God's control. And the Lord also has blessed us with wonderful advancements in science and in medicine in order to help understand cancer better and come up with therapies, treatments, and potentially cures for it. So we always keep our trust in the Lord. So I hope this has been helpful and that you understand cancer better, and wish you a wonderful day.